My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 23 years old, and there is a sentence I still cannot say out loud without feeling the air in the room change. My uncle got my mother pregnant. Not a stranger. Not some man whose face I would never have to picture again. Her brother. My father's brother-in-law. The man who sat at our table on Sundays as if he belonged there. The man who brought the best Christmas gifts. The man who laughed too loudly in our kitchen and teased me when I was younger about boys I liked and dresses I wore and the fact that I blushed too easily. The kind of man who had always been folded so deeply into the architecture of family that I never imagined he could be separate from it. And when the truth finally came out, when it cracked through the surface of our lives and showed us what had really been living underneath it, my grandparents sat my father down in their living room and told him family forgives. They told him broken things could be repaired. They told him mistakes happen. They told him, in so many words, that he should find a way to swallow what had been done to him so the rest of them could go on pretending they were still a family. I was 16 years old. I was standing in the hallway outside that room with my back pressed against the wall, listening through a door that had not been closed all the way. And I watched my father become still in a way I had never seen before. Not angry, not shattered, not even surprised anymore. Just finished, as if something inside him had completed its final calculation, as if he had been measuring the foundation beneath his life for 2 weeks straight and had finally reached the only conclusion left. He stood up. He thanked them. Then he walked into the hallway, looked at me once, and said, "Get your coat." I got my coat. We did not go back. People always want stories like this to be simple. They want one clean villain, one clean victim, one clear ending. They want grief arranged in straight lines so they can decide how to feel about it quickly and move on. But this story did not happen in straight lines. It spread. It ruined things beyond the obvious things. It touched people who had not created the damage but still had to grow up inside it. And if I am going to tell it honestly, I have to begin before that hallway, before the coat, before the door half open in my grandparents' house, back when the world still looked solid from where I stood. My parents had been married 14 years when everything collapsed. To me, as their daughter, it had seemed like a good marriage. Not perfect. I'm old enough now to know that no child is really a reliable narrator of a marriage, but it had felt steady, safe, built. My father, Daniel Bennett, was a contractor. He built things for a living, which made sense even then. He was the kind of man who measured twice, cut once, checked every hinge, tightened every loose screw, and rarely spoke before he had already thought through exactly what he meant. He wasn't cold. People who didn't know him well sometimes mistook quiet for coldness, but he was not cold. He was deliberate. There's a difference. My mother, Laura Bennett, was the opposite in all the ways that made people say they balanced each other. She was warm, social, fast-moving, good with names, birthdays, menus, last-minute hosting disasters, and the subtle emotional weather of a room. She could make almost anyone feel included. Our house often sounded like her laughter carrying from one room to another. She remembered what people liked in their coffee. She sent thank you cards. She hosted holidays like she had been born for it. For 14 years, from where I stood, those differences worked. Or maybe I just needed them to. My mother's family was everywhere in our lives. My maternal grandparents lived 20 minutes away. Their house had the smell of cinnamon and old furniture polish, and the same local news murmuring from the television every time you walked in. There was always a plate of something in the kitchen, always a chair my grandfather sat in, always a sense that the house had been there before you and would stay there after you. As a child, I mistook consistency for safety. A lot of children do. My mother's younger brother, Robbie, was part of all of it. Uncle Robbie. 3 years younger than my mother. Funny, easy, charming in the way that makes adults seem magical to kids and makes other adults forgive them things they should probably not forgive. He told stories well. He gave slightly outrageous presents. He was the uncle who made an entrance, who knew how to hold a room, who made people laugh before they had time to decide whether they actually trusted him. When I was younger, I adored him. That is one of the ugliest parts of this story to admit, because once the truth arrives, memory changes shape around it. Jokes sound different. Smiles look different. A man reaching for a serving spoon at Sunday dinner no longer looks like a relative helping himself to mashed potatoes. He looks like someone who had already crossed a line so grotesque and intimate that everything ordinary he did before and after it becomes unbearable to revisit. But at the time, he was my uncle. That was enough. Then my mother got pregnant. She was 41, which made it unexpected enough to feel almost miraculous in the beginning. I still remember the atmosphere in the house in those first days. Surprised laughter, cautious excitement, a kind of fragile joy moving through the rooms, as if no one wanted to touch it too hard and scare it away. My father had always wanted a third child. He had made peace, quietly, with the idea that it probably wasn't happening. That was his way with disappointment. He absorbed it privately until it became part of him. So when the pregnancy happened, I remember seeing something in him I had not seen in years. Happiness. Not loud happiness. My father was never loud about anything. But real happiness. Deep and reverent and almost shy. He would rest his hand on my mother's stomach in passing with this careful tenderness that still makes me feel sick when I think about it now. Because it was real. That is what matters. His joy was real. He was not foolish. He was not naive. He was not playing pretend. He was a husband standing inside what he believed was his life, loving what he believed was his child. And while he was doing that, other people already knew the truth. That is the part I have never been able to forgive. Not first, not deepest, but maybe most cleanly. Because betrayal by the people inside your marriage is one kind of devastation. Betrayal by the people standing around it, watching, knowing, saying nothing, is another. What I know now, pieced together from fragments over the years, is that my mother went to her parents before she told my father. I do not know whether she went to them for help, for absolution, for strategy, or because panic made her run backward into childhood and she wanted someone older to tell her what to do. Maybe it was all of those things. What matters is this: my grandparents knew. They knew before my father did. They knew while he was walking around our house with quiet joy on his face. They knew while he was making plans. They knew while he was touching my mother's stomach like something precious lived there that belonged to him. And they said nothing. They protected their son. I want to be fair, even now. I want to allow for the possibility that they were horrified, overwhelmed, ashamed, desperate. All of the emotions people reach for when they realize the family they raised is not the family they thought they raised. But whatever they felt, they still made a choice. They looked at my father and chose silence. The truth came out the way horrible truths often do. Not in some dramatic confession under rain and thunder, but through a stupid practical detail. A document from the doctor's office. A discrepancy. A question that should not have existed, except it did. My father asked it. My mother tried to answer. The answer collapsed under its own weight. I was at school that day. I did not witness the conversation that tore my parents' marriage open. What I came home to was worse in a different way. The house was intact. Nothing was broken. No lamps shattered. No plates thrown. No screaming echoing through the rooms. But the air had changed. You can feel it when a house has just survived an emotional explosion. Everything still stands, but the silence has pressure in it. My mother was in the bedroom with the door shut. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, both hands flat on the wood, not moving. Just sitting there like a man holding himself in place by force. He looked up when I came in, and I knew instantly that something had happened in a category I had never encountered before. Not an argument, not money trouble, not stress. Something structural. Something that had changed the shape of the house without moving a single wall. "Sit down," he said. His voice was calm. That frightened me more than if he had been shouting. I sat across from him. My backpack was still on one shoulder. I remember that stupid detail because I didn't take it off right away. It stayed hanging there like my body hadn't caught up to what was happening. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. Then he said, "Your mother is pregnant." I stared at him. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I thought I already knew that. The whole house knew that. We had all been living inside that fact for weeks. But there was something in his face that made me stay silent. He swallowed once. Then he said, "The baby isn't mine." Even now, I can still feel the sensation that moved through me then. Not exactly disbelief. More like my mind reaching for the edges of a thing and finding none. I stared at the table between us. I stared at the grain in the wood because I could not yet look at his face again. My heart was beating so hard it felt mechanical. I heard myself ask, in a voice that did not sound like mine, "Whose is it?" He did not answer immediately. There are silences that are empty, and there are silences so full they almost become their own language. This was the second kind. Finally, he said, "Robbie's." I looked up. He did not flinch. He did not soften it. He did not give me a gentler lie first. He told me the truth and let it land where it landed. And the world did something I still do not know how to describe except to say it rearranged itself violently. Robbie, Uncle Robbie. The uncle who brought the good Christmas gifts, the uncle who leaned against our kitchen counter and told jokes, The uncle who had spent years walking freely in and out of our lives with everyone's trust draped over him like a coat. I remember gripping the edge of the chair. I remember the refrigerator humming too loudly. I remember wanting to throw up. I remember thinking, in one bright, impossible flash, that maybe my father had made some mistake. Maybe there was another Robbie. Maybe some detail would come that made this sentence belong to a different world than mine. But there was no other world, only this one. And in this one, my mother had slept with her brother. And in this one, my grandparents had known. And in this one, my father was sitting across from me, trying to remain upright while the life he had built collapsed inward. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. Nobody left right away. My mother stayed in the house. My father stayed in the house. They moved around each other in these quiet, unbearable parallel lines, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Their politeness more horrifying than screaming would have been. My younger brother, Ethan, was 12 and only knew that something was wrong in the adult universe. He kept asking why everybody was acting weird. I kept telling him it was adult stuff and he didn't need to worry, which was a lie and not a lie. He did need to worry. He just wasn't old enough yet to know what shape the worry should take. I carried the secret like something radioactive. Every room in the house felt contaminated by what had been said in the kitchen. My grandparents called during those 2 weeks, more than once. Eventually, they asked my father to come over so everyone could talk. I asked if I could go with him. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. So we drove there together in a silence that was not empty at all. It was dense with all the words neither of us had yet figured out how to say. And that is how I ended up in the hallway outside my grandparents' living room, standing still, listening. I heard my grandmother first. "Family is family," she said. Then my grandfather. "Robbie made a mistake, Daniel. A terrible mistake, yes, but still a mistake. A mistake." That word. As though there were not choices inside it. As though a grown man tripping on the front steps and a grown man sleeping with his sister while her husband smiled about a coming baby belonged in the same category. Then my grandmother again, voice shaking with urgency now. "Think of the children. Meaning me. Meaning Ethan. Meaning our lives should be used as leverage to push my father back into a room he should never have had to enter in the first place." What I did not hear, not once, was anyone say this was unforgivable. Not once did I hear Robbie named with the full moral weight of what he had done. Not once did I hear my father offered the protection they were so eager to offer their son. And through the narrow crack in the door, I could see my father sitting there in their living room, hands clasped, face calm, listening as the people who should have stood beside him explained why he needed to make himself smaller for everybody else's comfort. Then he went still, truly still, like a door closing quietly. He stood up. He thanked them. And a moment later, he was in the hallway in front of me, looking directly into my face. "Get your coat," he said. "There are moments that decide your life before you understand that they are doing it." That was one of them. The first thing people did after my father left was try to explain his decision back to us. Not to understand it, to soften it, to reshape it into something more comfortable to hold. He's hurt. He's angry. He just needs time. As if time would somehow dissolve what had happened into something manageable. As if the problem was his reaction, not the thing that required a reaction in the first place. The divorce papers were filed within a month. There was no dramatic confrontation in a courtroom, no shouting, no public unraveling. My father handled it the same way he handled everything. Quietly, thoroughly, without theatrics. Documents were signed. Accounts were separated. A life that had taken 14 years to build was dismantled with the same careful precision he used to build houses. It was almost unbearable to watch, because nothing about what had been done to him was precise or careful, and yet he refused to let the aftermath be chaotic. I moved into the apartment with him. It was smaller than our house, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a kitchen that could barely fit both of us at once. At first it felt temporary, like we were waiting for something to reset, for someone to realize a mistake had been made and come fix it. But no one came. And slowly, almost without announcing itself, that apartment became real. My brother Ethan stayed primarily with my mother. At 12, he wasn't asked to choose. Or maybe he was, just in quieter ways. The default was stability. The default was the house he knew. The default was the parent who had always been the center of daily life. So he stayed. And just like that, we began living inside the same event, in completely different versions of its aftermath. We talked. We texted. We saw each other on weekends sometimes. We tried, in the way siblings do when they love each other, to pretend there wasn't something new standing between us. But there was. Not a wall exactly. More like a gap. Invisible but structural. He still went to Sunday dinners at our grandparents' house. I didn't. He still saw our mother every day. I saw her in carefully measured doses, in spaces that felt neutral enough to hold both of us without collapsing under the weight of everything unsaid. We were growing up in parallel realities, and neither of us had chosen it in the way people think of choosing. My mother's family moved quickly, not to fix what had happened, but to control how it was understood. The narrative settled into place with almost frightening efficiency. My father had overreacted. My father was punishing everyone. My father was letting anger destroy something that could still be saved. My grandmother led this effort with a kind of relentless conviction that might have been impressive if it hadn't been so devastating. She called me constantly in those first months. At first I answered, I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or the lingering belief that she was still my grandmother in the way she had always been. That the woman who used to press cookies into my hands and ask about my school day still existed untouched beneath everything that had happened. But the calls were never what I needed them to be. They weren't questions. They were explanations. Carefully constructed, calmly delivered, designed to guide me toward a conclusion I was supposed to accept. Your father is a good man, she would say, but he's hurt right now. He's not thinking clearly. Or, families go through things like this. Strong families find a way back. Or the one she returned to most often, like it was a truth so obvious it didn't need defending. Forgiveness is what holds a family together. I listened. At 16, I was old enough to understand what she was saying, but I was also old enough to notice what she wasn't saying. She never said, what your uncle did was wrong. Not clearly, not directly. The closest she came was phrases like, mistakes were made. Passive, weightless, as if the thing itself had simply appeared, fully formed, without anyone choosing it. As if my father had not been the one it happened to. I started to dread her calls. Not because they were loud or aggressive, but because they required me to sit there and absorb a version of reality that I knew was incomplete. And worse than incomplete, dishonest. By the end of the second month, I stopped answering. She kept calling. Voicemails stacked up, gentle at first, then concerned, then slightly sharper around the edges, like confusion was turning into frustration. Claire, sweetheart, I don't understand why you're shutting us out like this. As if I were the one doing the shutting. As if doors hadn't already been closed long before I picked up my coat. Around that same time, my uncle reached out. Just once. A text message. I remember exactly where I was when I read it. Sitting on the edge of my bed in my father's apartment. The light from the window hitting the screen just enough that I had to tilt it to see clearly. It said, I know you're angry. I hope someday you'll understand that adults make mistakes. I love you and Ethan, and I hope we can have a relationship again when things calm down. I read it 3 times. Not because it was complicated, but because I kept expecting something else to appear. An apology. Acknowledgement. Anything that suggested he understood what he had actually done. But it never came. No, I'm sorry. No, I hurt you. No, I destroyed something. Just a hope that things would calm down. As if this were weather. As if time passing would make the shape of it less severe. I didn't respond. I never have. The baby was born in the spring. A girl. My half-sister. Even now, that phrase still feels like something I have to rearrange internally before it fits. Half-sister. It's technically accurate. Biologically precise. But emotionally, it doesn't land cleanly. I met her for the first time when she was a few weeks old. My mother had asked carefully, almost like she was approaching something fragile that might shatter if she moved too quickly. Just for a little while, she said. You don't have to stay long. We met at her house. My house once. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a version of my life that had been preserved behind glass. Everything looked the same. The couch, the pictures on the wall, the faint scent of the detergent my mother always used. But it didn't feel the same. It felt staged, like a set built to resemble something real. My mother was holding the baby when I came in. She looked up at me, with this expression I still don't fully know how to name. Hope, fear, guilt, love, all layered together in a way that made it hard to look at her directly for too long. Do you want to hold her? She asked. I hesitated, not because of the baby, but because of everything the baby represented. Then I nodded. She placed her in my arms gently, like she was transferring something sacred. And for a moment, everything else disappeared, because she was just a child. Small, warm, completely unaware of the circumstances that had created her. She had my mother's eyes, and my uncle's chin. That was the part that caught in my throat. The undeniable evidence of both of them in one face. I held her carefully. She made a soft sound and shifted slightly against me, and I felt something complicated move through my chest. Not anger, not toward her, never toward her, but something like grief, colliding with tenderness. Because she didn't choose any of this, and yet she would grow up inside it, carrying a story she didn't create. I gave her back after a few minutes. I should go, I said. My mother nodded too quickly, like she had expected that. Of course, thank you for coming. We stood there for a second longer than necessary. There were things we could have said, questions I could have asked, explanations she might have tried to give, but neither of us reached for them. Not yet. Outside, the air felt different, clearer. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. Just breathing. Just trying to settle everything that had been stirred up by something as simple as holding a baby. My brother met her more often. He had a relationship with her that I didn't, and I understood that. He was still inside that house, still part of that version of the family. He adapted in ways I couldn't, or maybe in ways I chose not to. We talked about it once, not long after she was born. She's just a kid, Claire, he said. I know, I answered, and I did. That was never the question. The question was how to hold two truths at the same time, that she was innocent, and that she was also the living proof of something that had broken everything I thought I understood about my family. I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure I fully do even now. What I did have was a growing certainty about one thing. The story my mother's family was trying to build, the one where this could be smoothed over, reframed, eventually absorbed into something that looked like normal again, was not a story I was willing to live inside. And every time my phone lit up with my grandmother's name, every time I thought about that text from my uncle, every time I remembered the words for the children being used as leverage against my father, that certainty hardened, because I had been in the hallway. I had heard what they chose to say when it mattered. And once you hear something like that clearly, you can't unhear it. 7 years is a long time. Long enough for something sharp to become something dull. Long enough for something unbearable to become livable. Not better. Not fixed, just carried. The divorce was finalized 1.5 years after my father filed. There were no surprises in the outcome. My mother kept the house. It made sense on paper. Ethan was still living there, and stability mattered in ways that courts understand better than emotional nuance. My father got an apartment across town. At first, it looked like a temporary space, a place someone stayed in while waiting for their real life to resume. But my father doesn't live that way. He doesn't wait for things to become something else. He builds with what he has. Slowly, the apartment changed. A better couch replaced the cheap one he'd started with. Bookshelves went up. A kitchen table appeared. Solid wood, simple, chosen carefully. We started having dinner there on Sunday nights. Just the two of us at first. Then occasionally Ethan would come too, sitting between two versions of a family that no longer fit together the way they used to. It became our ritual. Our version of the Sunday dinners I had lost. Smaller. Quieter, but real. That word mattered more to me now than it ever had before. Real. Nothing performed, nothing smoothed over, nothing pretending to be intact when it wasn't. My father didn't date for 4 years. I never asked him why. I didn't need to. Some things don't require explanation when you've seen where they came from. When he finally did start seeing someone, it wasn't dramatic. No big announcement. No introduction built up over weeks. He just mentioned her one night, casually, like it was a fact that had quietly become true. Her name is Melissa, he said. She's steady. That was all. Steady. It was the highest compliment he knew how to give. When I met her, I understood immediately what he meant. She didn't try too hard, didn't overfill silences, didn't perform warmth or demand closeness. She met my father where he actually was, not where someone might have expected him to be after everything. And watching him with her, watching him exist in something that looked like peace again, even if it was quieter and more contained than before. That was one of the first times I felt something inside me loosen. Not heal, but loosen. My relationship with my mother didn't disappear. It would have been easier if it had. Cleaner. People like clean stories. Estrangement makes sense to outsiders. It fits into categories they understand. But that's not what happened. Instead, we built something complicated. We saw each other. Not constantly, not casually, but consistently. Coffee sometimes. Short visits, conversations that stayed in safer territory at first, circling around the edges of everything we weren't yet ready to touch. She showed up for me. That matters. She came to my graduation. She called on my birthday. She remembered things that mattered to me, even when everything else between us felt uncertain. She never asked me to pretend. That mattered more. She never said, it wasn't that bad. Never tried to rewrite the past in a way that erased what had happened. There was remorse in her. Real remorse. I could see it in the way she held herself around me, in the carefulness of her words, in the moments where something unsaid would pass between us and she would look away first. But remorse isn't the same as explanation. And explanation was the thing I kept circling back to. Not why. I understood intellectually that people do things for reasons that don't justify the things themselves. Why is often a useless question in situations like this. But how? That was different. How do you live inside a lie like that? How do you look at your husband, watch him touch your stomach with that kind of quiet reverence, and say nothing? I asked her once. Just once. It was about 3 years after everything had happened. We were sitting in her kitchen, the same kitchen, unchanged, like time had decided to leave that room alone. We had been talking about something else, something neutral, work, maybe, or a show she had been watching. Then there was a pause, and I felt it. That moment where you either stay on the surface or you go under. How? I asked. She looked at me, not confused, not defensive. She knew exactly what I meant. For a second, I thought she might not answer. Then her face changed. Not dramatically. Just something gave way. Her eyes filled, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't steady. I don't have an answer that's good enough, she said. There isn't one. That was it. No justification, no story, no attempt to make it make sense. Just the truth. There isn't one. And somehow that was both exactly what I needed to hear, and not enough at all. We didn't talk about it again. Not directly, but something shifted after that. Not repaired, not resolved, but acknowledged. Like we had both agreed, silently, that there were limits to what could be explained, and that forcing something beyond those limits would only make it worse. My grandmother died 3 years ago. That was complicated. Everything about her had become complicated. The woman I remembered from childhood, the one who baked, who laughed, who made everything feel stable and predictable. She still existed in my memory, but she was no longer the only version of her I carried. Now there was also the woman who had sat in that living room and asked my father to forgive something that should never have been his to carry. I didn't go to the funeral. I want to be honest about that, because it wasn't an easy decision. I thought about it for days, ran through different versions of what it would look like. Walking into that church, seeing my uncle for the first time in years, standing near people who had chosen silence when it mattered most. I tried to imagine a version of that experience that didn't leave me feeling worse. I couldn't find one, so I didn't go. My mother went, Ethan went. My father didn't. That felt right. I sent flowers. I wrote a card, not a polite empty message. Something real, about the grandmother she had been to me before everything changed. Because that part was true too, and ignoring it would have been another kind of dishonesty. But she died knowing I wasn't there, and I have to live with that. There's no version of that decision that comes without weight. My grandfather is still alive. He's older now, declining from what I've been told. I send cards sometimes. Christmas, birthdays. He's never responded. I don't know if he ever will. I don't know if I would go to his funeral. That's a decision I'll make when the time comes. I've stopped trying to pre-decide things that haven't happened yet. 7 years changes how you carry things. It doesn't remove them. It just distributes the weight differently. The acute pain, the kind that knocks the air out of you without warning, that fades. But what replaces it is quieter, persistent. It shows up in ordinary moments, holidays that require choices, graduations that require careful positioning, conversations that require editing before you even begin speaking. How's your family? Becomes a question with too many possible answers. So you simplify it. You say, they're good, or it's complicated, and you move on. But inside, you know exactly what that complication contains. My brother and I talk about it more now. We didn't at first. Not really. Back then, we were too busy trying to survive our separate versions of it. But adulthood changes things. Gives you language you didn't have before. Perspective. Distance. He told me once what it was like staying. Really staying. Not just physically, but emotionally. It wasn't normal, Claire, he said. But everyone acted like it was supposed to be. That stayed with me, because it captured something I had felt but never experienced directly. He had been inside the version of the family that continued. The dinners, the holidays, the routines. But underneath it, everything was off. And part of him had been expected to ignore that. To be pleasant, to participate, to act like continuity meant things were okay. That does something to you, he said. I know, I answered. And I did. Just from the other side of it. We carry different versions of the same damage. Neither of us untouched. Neither of us entirely broken either. We've worked at staying close. Carefully. Intentionally. Because that's one of the few things we both agreed on from the beginning. We weren't going to lose each other too. My half-sister is 7 now. I've seen her a handful of times. More than in the beginning. Still not regularly. But enough that she recognizes me. She's bright. curious, completely her own person. And every time I see her, I feel that same collision inside me. Care, and something heavier. Not resentment, not toward her, never that. Just the awareness of what she represents in the story of my life. And the fact that she will one day understand that story for herself. I don't know what that will look like yet. I'm still figuring out what my place in it is. But I'm trying, in the only way I know how. Honestly, there is a version of this story that my grandmother believed in until the day she died. I heard it the first time through a half-open door. I've heard echoes of it ever since, in phone calls, in careful conversations, in the way people outside the situation try to make sense of something that makes them uncomfortable. It's the version where forgiveness is the highest virtue, where family, no matter what happens inside it, is something you preserve at all costs, where the real failure isn't the betrayal. It's the refusal to move past it. I sat with that version for a long time, longer than I like to admit, because I am not someone who wants to believe I am incapable of forgiveness. I don't want to be rigid or cold or the kind of person who holds on to anger so tightly that it defines them. So I examined it, carefully, the way my father would have. And what I came to understand is this. Forgiveness and proximity are not the same thing. They get confused, constantly, especially in families. Forgiveness is internal. It's something that happens, or doesn't happen, inside a person, over time, in ways that can't be rushed or forced or scheduled for the convenience of others. It's not a performance. It's not something you do because someone asks you to. And it is definitely not something you owe to the person who hurt you in order to make them more comfortable. What my grandparents were asking for in that living room, what my grandmother meant when she said for the children, that wasn't forgiveness. That was management. They were asking my father to absorb what had been done to him, to stay, to sit at the same table, to maintain the structure of a family that had already broken, so that everyone else wouldn't have to face what had actually happened. They were asking him to carry it quietly, to make it smaller, to make himself smaller, and call that healing. My father didn't argue. That's the part people don't understand. They expect shouting, confrontation, some dramatic declaration of boundaries. But that's not who he is. He listened, he measured, and then he decided. He stood up, he thanked them, and he walked out. That was it. The entire weight of that moment contained in a man choosing not to stay in a room that required him to betray himself. I think about that a lot now, not just in the context of what happened then, but in the context of everything that has come after. Because that moment didn't just define the end of his marriage. It defined something else. A line, clear, unmovable. A line that said, "This is what I will not accept." And at 16, standing in that hallway, I saw it. Maybe not with full understanding, but with enough clarity to recognize it when it appeared. And when he told me to get my coat, what he was really offering me wasn't just an exit from that house. It was a choice. Stay or go. Participate in the version of reality being constructed in that living room, or refuse it. I chose him, not because he's perfect, not because it was easier, but because in that moment, he was the only one standing in something that felt true. 7 years later, I still believe that. But I also understand something now that I didn't fully grasp then. Being right doesn't mean being untouched. There is a cost to walking out of a room like that. A real one. You lose things. Not just the obvious things. Not just people or traditions or places. You lose simplicity. You lose the ability to talk about your family without editing. You lose the version of your childhood that felt whole, even if it wasn't. You lose the illusion that the people who raised you will always choose what is right over what is comfortable. And some of those losses don't get replaced. They just become part of you. But there are things you gain too. They're quieter, less visible, but just as real. I have my father, not the version of him that existed before everything happened, but the version that came after. The one who rebuilt something smaller, but honest. The one who sits across from me at that kitchen table every Sunday and asks how my week was and actually listens to the answer. The one who doesn't pretend. Who doesn't ask me to pretend. I have my brother. Not perfectly. Not without effort. But genuinely. We understand each other now in ways we couldn't before. Because we've both seen what happens when people choose comfort over truth. And we've chosen again and again not to do that with each other. I have my mother. In a way that is real precisely because it is not simple. We don't lie to each other. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. We exist in something that requires maintenance, but also contains honesty, and that matters. More than I used to think it would. And I have something else. Something I didn't know I was building when I walked out of that house with my coat in my hands. Clarity about what I will accept, about what I won't, about the difference between loyalty and complicity, about the kind of person I want to be when I am standing in a room where the wrong thing is being said. by people who should know better, because that's the part people don't talk about enough. The hallway. That space just outside, the moment where everything is decided, where you hear what's being said, where you understand, maybe for the first time, exactly who the people around you are choosing to be. And you realize, you're about to choose too. I was 16. I got my coat. I'm 23 now, and I would get it again. I don't know what my uncle thinks about what he did. I don't know if he's ever fully understood it, if he's ever let it settle into him in a way that goes beyond polite apologies and vague acknowledgments. I hope he has. Not for me. For him, because I think there is a particular weight that follows a person who does something like that and never truly faces it. But whether he has or hasn't, it doesn't change what he took. Not just from my father, from all of us. He took the structure, the assumption that the people closest to you are who they appear to be, the ability to trust without constantly checking for cracks. And my grandparents, with their silence, their protection, their insistence on preserving the surface at the expense of the truth, they took something too. They took the version of family that might have survived in a different form if they had chosen differently, if they had said the right thing, if they had stood in the truth instead of trying to reshape it. They didn't. And then they asked my father to help carry what they had broken. He refused, and I refused with him. If you're reading this, if you've ever stood in that kind of hallway, if you've ever heard people you love say something you knew, deep down, was wrong, and felt the pressure to go along with it because it would be easier, because it would keep the peace, because it would let things look normal again, I want you to understand something. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to step out of a room that asks you to make yourself smaller. You are allowed to choose truth over comfort, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you, because some rooms, no matter how familiar, no matter how full of people you love, are not places you can stay without losing something you can't get back. My father knew that. He taught me how to recognize it. And when I walked out into the cold with him that night, I wasn't abandoning my family. I was choosing who I was going to be.